The late afternoon sun cast golden rays across the Sanders' backyard, illuminating the neatly trimmed hedges and the wooden deck that had become the center of family life. Adam Sanders sat at the edge of the deck, dangling his legs over the side, as he watched his best friend, Luke Evans, flick a basketball back and forth in his hands. It was their usual hangout spot, the place where they had spent countless evenings talking about everything from high school drama to the dreams they were chasing in college. But today, the conversation felt heavier, weighed down by an unspoken tension Adam couldn't quite name. "How's school going?" Luke asked, his voice casual, though his gaze kept flicking toward the sliding glass door that led to the kitchen. "Same old," Adam replied, shrugging. "Classes are fine. Professors are boring. You know how it is." Luke chuckled, but his attention seemed elsewhere. Adam followed his friend's gaze and found it resting on Elena, his stepmother, who was moving around the kitchen with practiced grace. She was arranging flowers in a vase, her back turned to them, and her every movement seemed deliberate, as though she knew she was being watched. Adam frowned, a knot forming in his stomach. Elena Carter had married his father, James, just 2 years ago, and while Adam had accepted her into their family, he couldn't deny that she had a way of commanding attention wherever she went. At 35, she was strikingly beautiful, with sharp features and an air of effortless confidence. But it wasn't just her looks, there was something about her presence. The way she carried herself. That drew people in. "You've been staring at her a lot lately," Adam said, his tone laced with playful accusation, though there was an edge of seriousness beneath it. Luke snapped his attention back to Adam, his face flushing slightly. "What? No, I haven't." Adam raised an eyebrow, a small smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, okay." Luke looked down at the basketball, spinning it in his hands as though it held the answer to his embarrassment. "She's hard not to notice. You know?" Adam didn't respond right away. He had noticed it too. The way Elena seemed to light up a room. The way her laugh lingered in the air. It wasn't something he had ever thought about consciously. But now that Luke had brought it up, he couldn't help but feel the awkwardness creeping in. Inside the house, Elena turned toward the glass door, catching their eyes for just a moment before offering a warm smile. She waved, and Adam forced himself to wave back, while Luke quickly averted his gaze. "She's just being nice," Adam said, trying to brush off the moment. "Don't read too much into it." But as Elena opened the door and stepped onto the deck, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of lemonade, Adam felt the atmosphere shift. The way she moved, the way she smiled, it wasn't just nice. It was something else entirely. The living room was bathed in soft, golden light as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Adam and Luke sat on the couch, their laughter filling the space as they watched old videos from their high school days. The air smelled faintly of the lavender candles Elena always kept burning, a scent that had become synonymous with home over the past 2 years. Adam was mid-laugh when Elena walked into the room. She was wearing a sleek black dress, the kind that hugged her figure without being overtly revealing, and her hair was swept to one side in loose waves. She carried herself with the same effortless confidence as always, but tonight there was something different about her presence. Something that made Adam sit up just a little straighter. "Don't let me interrupt," Elena said, her voice warm as she moved toward the bar cart in the corner. "I just needed a glass of wine." Luke's laughter faltered, and Adam noticed his friend's posture stiffen slightly. He shot Luke a look, but his friend's gaze was fixed on Elena as she poured herself a drink. There was nothing overtly inappropriate about her actions, but the way she lingered at the bar, the way her eyes flicked toward them with a faint smile, made the air feel heavier. "You boys look like you're having fun," Elena said, taking a sip of her wine before walking over to the couch. "Mind if I join?" Adam hesitated, glancing at Luke, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the cushions. Sure," Adam said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. Elena sat down beside them, her presence commanding the space. "What are you watching?" she asked, leaning over to peer at the screen. "Just some old videos," Adam said, his voice tight. He could feel the tension radiating off Luke, who was doing his best to avoid looking directly at her. Elena laughed softly as a particularly embarrassing clip of Adam played on the screen. Ah, the glory days, she teased, her tone light, but then her hand brushed against Adam's arm. And the gesture, though seemingly innocent, sent a jolt through him. Adam glanced at Luke, whose face was flushed. The unspoken tension between them was becoming impossible to ignore. And for the first time, Adam felt a pang of discomfort he couldn't shake. Elena leaned back against the couch, crossing her legs. The hem of her dress slid up slightly, just enough to make Adam look away, his face burning. She seemed to notice the effect she was having, a small smile playing on her lips as she took another sip of her wine. "You boys are so quiet all of a sudden," she said, her tone teasing. "Did I interrupt something?" "No, we were just watching," Luke stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena's gaze lingered on him for a moment, her smile deepening. "Good," she said softly, her tone almost playful. "I wouldn't want to ruin your fun." The faint hum of the TV filled the silence in the living room. But none of them were paying attention to what was on the screen. Adam's mind raced as he tried to shake off the awkwardness that had settled over the room since Elena had joined them. Luke, on the other hand, looked like he was trying to disappear entirely, shifting uncomfortably in his seat every time Elena glanced his way. "So," Elena began, breaking the silence, "how long have you two been friends?" "Since, like, middle school," Adam replied, grateful for the distraction of conversation. "We've been through pretty much everything together." "Everything?" Elena teased, raising an eyebrow. "That's a bold claim. I bet there are some stories you haven't told me." Her eyes sparkled as she leaned back into the couch, her posture relaxed but somehow commanding. Adam felt a pang of unease as he noticed how her attention shifted between him and Luke, her gaze lingering just a little too long. "There's not much to tell," Adam said quickly, trying to steer the conversation back to neutral ground. "We were just dumb kids. You know?" Luke cleared his throat, finally speaking up. "Yeah, nothing too crazy." Elena tilted her head, studying them both with a faint smile. "I don't believe that for a second. Everyone has stories." She reached for her wine glass, taking a slow sip before setting it down on the coffee table. The movement drew Adam's attention. She had a way of making even the simplest gestures seem deliberate, calculated. "Well, if you won't share, I guess I'll have to tell you a story," Elena said, her voice taking on a playful edge. "Did I ever tell you about the time I almost didn't make it to my wedding?" Adam blinked, caught off guard. "What?" Elena grinned. "It's true. The night before, I panicked. I started second-guessing everything, wondering if I was ready to settle down, if I'd made the right choice, you know. The usual pre-wedding jitters." Adam exchanged a glance with Luke, who looked just as confused as he felt. This wasn't the kind of thing she usually talked about, and he wasn't sure where she was going with it. "What happened?" Luke asked hesitantly. Elena's smile softened, her gaze distant for a moment. "James convinced me to go through with it. He said we didn't have to be perfect. We just had to be honest with each other." That stuck with me. Her eyes flicked back to Adam, then to Luke, and her smile took on a mischievous edge. "I guess I've always believed honesty is the most important thing in any relationship." Adam shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. The way she was looking at them now, it wasn't just playful. It was almost daring. "I think that's a good philosophy," Adam said finally, his voice tight. Elena leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. "Do you?" Adam hesitated, feeling the weight of her gaze. "Yeah, I mean, honesty's important." "Good," Elena said softly. "Then let's be honest." The room went silent again, the air thick with unspoken tension. Adam glanced at Luke, who looked like he wanted to bolt for the door, but neither of them moved. Elena's smile didn't waver as she sat back, crossing her legs again in a way that drew both of their eyes despite their best efforts. "You know," she said after a moment, "I've noticed the way you two look at me sometimes." Adam's heart skipped a beat. He froze, his mind racing as he tried to process her words. Beside him, Luke stiffened, his face turning a deep shade of red. "What are you talking about?" Adam asked, his voice shaky. Elena's smile widened, her gaze steady. "Oh, Come on, don't play dumb. I'm not blind. Luke looked at Adam, his eyes wide with a mix of panic and disbelief. Adam opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Elena leaned forward again, her voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial tone. It's okay. I'm not offended. If anything, I'm flattered. Adam's face burned as he struggled to find the right words. We weren't. It's fine, Elena interrupted, her tone soothing. I get it. I really do. Her eyes flicked to Luke, and Adam saw the way his friend's breath hitched, his posture stiffening even further. You're both young, curious. It's natural. Adam's stomach churned. This was crossing into territory he wasn't prepared for, and he didn't know how to navigate it. He glanced at Luke again, but his friend looked just as lost as he felt. Elena, Adam began, his voice cracking slightly. I think you're reading too much into this. Am I? She asked, her smile turning almost teasing. You're both terrible at hiding it. You know. Adam felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. He wanted to deny it, to push back against whatever game she was playing. But he couldn't find the words. And the way she was looking at him, her gaze sharp and knowing, it made it hard to think clearly. Beside him, Luke finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I think, maybe we should go. Elena tilted her head, her smile softening. If that's what you want. She stood gracefully, picking up her wine glass and walking toward the kitchen. But as she passed them, she paused, her hand brushing lightly against Adam's shoulder. Think about what I said, she murmured before disappearing into the other room. For a long moment, Adam and Luke sat in stunned silence, neither of them daring to speak. Adam's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief, and he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. What the hell just happened? Luke finally asked, his voice shaky. Adam shook his head, unable to look at his friend. I don't know. Luke let out a shaky laugh, running a hand through his hair. Man, I don't even know what to say. Me neither, Adam admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. They sat there for a while longer, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. Adam's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it, but the more he thought about it, the more tangled everything became. All he knew was that nothing would be the same after tonight. The next morning, Adam woke up feeling as though he had barely slept. The events of the previous evening played on a loop in his mind, Elena's words, her knowing smile, the way her hand had brushed against his shoulder. He stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything, but no answers came. The sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand jolted him from his thoughts. He reached over and picked it up, his heart sinking when he saw Luke's name on the screen. The memory of his best friend's panicked expression flashed in his mind as he hesitated, unsure if he was ready to talk. Finally, he answered, Hey, man. Luke's voice came through, low and tense. I don't even know where to start. Me neither, Adam admitted, sitting up and rubbing his temples. What the hell was that last night? I don't know, Luke said, his voice tinged with disbelief. But, it felt like she wasn't just messing around. You know, like, she was serious. Adam let out a shaky breath. Yeah, I know. There was a long pause, and Adam could hear the faint hum of background noise on Luke's end. Finally, his friend spoke again, his voice quieter. What do we do now? Adam didn't have an answer. Part of him wanted to pretend the whole thing had never happened, to bury it deep and move on like it was just a weird, one-off moment. But another part of him, the part that couldn't forget the way Elena had looked at them, the way her voice had dipped to a near whisper, knew it wasn't that simple. I don't know, man, Adam said finally, but we can't let this mess everything up. Yeah, Luke said, though he didn't sound convinced. Yeah, you're right. Adam spent the rest of the day avoiding the living room, where Elena seemed to linger. He caught glimpses of her as he passed through the house, leaning against the kitchen counter with her phone in hand, sitting on the deck with a cup of tea, but he avoided eye contact, keeping his responses to her casual greetings as brief as possible. By the time evening rolled around, Adam was feeling a little more like himself. He had spent most of the day on his computer, drowning his thoughts in a video game marathon. And the distraction had worked, at least temporarily. But when he came downstairs to grab a snack, he found Elena in the kitchen, leaning over the counter as she scrolled through her phone. "Hey, Adam," she said, glancing up with a smile that was too casual to be natural. "Hey," he mumbled, opening the fridge and pretending to be absorbed in his search for something to eat. "How's your day been?" she asked, setting her phone down and folding her arms on the counter. Adam grabbed a soda and shut the fridge, keeping his gaze averted. "Fine." Elena chuckled softly. "You don't have to act so awkward. You know, I'm not," Adam said quickly, though the tension in his voice betrayed him. Elena walked around the counter, her bare feet making no sound on the tile floor. She stopped a few feet away, leaning casually against the edge. "About last night," she began, her tone light. "I hope I didn't make things too uncomfortable for you." Adam's heart raced, and he took a long sip of his soda to buy himself time to respond. "It's fine." "Good," she said softly, stepping closer. "Because I meant what I said." Adam froze, his grip tightening around the can. He glanced up at her, and the intensity in her gaze made his breath catch. "Elena, I don't think," he began. But she cut him off with a small, knowing smile. "You don't have to think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just be honest. With yourself. With me." Adam felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He couldn't look away from her, even though every rational part of his brain was screaming at him to walk away. But then, as quickly as the moment had come, it passed. Elena stepped back, her smile softening. "I'll leave you to it," she said, her tone casual once more. She grabbed her phone and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Adam standing there, his heart pounding. Later that night, Luke showed up at the house, looking as tense as Adam felt. They sat in Adam's room, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavily between them. Finally, Luke broke the silence. "She talked to me," he said, his voice quiet. "Texted me, actually." Adam frowned. "What did she say?" Luke pulled out his phone and handed it to Adam. The text was short, simple, but it hit Adam like a punch to the gut. "I hope last night didn't make things weird. Let's talk soon." Adam stared at the screen, his mind racing. "Did you respond?" Luke shook his head. "No, I didn't know what to say." Adam handed the phone back, his stomach churning. "This is getting out of hand." "Yeah," Luke said, his voice tight. "But what are we supposed to do?" Adam didn't have an answer. All he knew was that whatever had started last night was far from over. The days that followed were a blur of tension and uncertainty. Adam found himself walking on eggshells around Elena, avoiding her whenever possible. But the more he tried to distance himself, the more she seemed to find ways to pull him back in. Luke, too, was caught in the web. He started coming over less often, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a guarded unease. But despite his attempts to keep his distance, Adam could see the conflict in his friend's eyes every time they talked. And then, one evening, everything came to a head. It was a Friday night, and Luke had reluctantly agreed to come over after Adam promised they would just hang out in his room and avoid Elena altogether. They were halfway through a movie when there was a soft knock at the door. Adam's heart sank as the door opened and Elena stepped inside. She was dressed casually in jeans and a loose sweater, but her presence was anything but casual. She smiled at them, her gaze flicking between Adam and Luke. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her tone light. "I just wanted to see how you two were doing." Adam exchanged a nervous glance with Luke, who looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "We're fine," Adam said quickly. "Just watching a movie. Mind if I join?" Elena asked, her smile widening. Before either of them could respond, she stepped inside and sat down on the edge of the bed. Her movements deliberate. Adam felt his pulse quicken as she leaned back slightly, her gaze settling on Luke. "It's been a while since we've all hung out," she said, her tone almost playful. "I missed this." Luke glanced at Adam, his expression a mix of panic and confusion. Adam's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to defuse the situation. But before he could say anything, Elena leaned forward, her smile softening. "You know," she began, her voice low, "I think it's time we stopped dancing around this." Adam froze, his heart pounding. Elena. She held up a hand. Cutting him off. It's okay, she said, her gaze steady. I know this is unusual. But I also know you've both been thinking about it. Haven't you? The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Adam glanced at Luke, whose face was pale, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and something else. Something Adam couldn't quite name. Elena, Adam said finally, his voice shaking. This isn't. Don't overthink it, she interrupted, her smile soft but insistent. Just be honest. That's all I'm asking. Adam felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. The ground crumbling beneath him. He didn't know what to say. What to do. All he knew was that this moment would change everything. The silence in Adam's room stretched unbearably long. Elena's words lingered in the air, creating an oppressive weight that neither Adam nor Luke knew how to handle. Both of them sat frozen, their minds racing but unable to land on a single coherent thought. Finally, Luke broke the silence, his voice shaky but firm. I don't think this is a good idea. Adam glanced at him, relieved that Luke had found the courage to say what Adam couldn't. Elena, however, didn't look surprised. If anything, her smile only softened, as though she had been expecting resistance. That's fair, she said, her tone calm. I know this isn't conventional, but I also think it's worth talking about. Luke shook his head, standing up from the bed. I don't think there's anything to talk about. This is wrong. Elena's expression didn't falter, but Adam could see the faintest flicker of disappointment in her eyes. I understand, she said softly. I just thought, maybe it was worth being honest about how we're all feeling. Luke grabbed his phone from the nightstand. His movements hurried. I think I should go. Adam stood as well, his heart pounding. Luke. No, Luke said, cutting him off. I'll see you later. He didn't look back as he left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. The sound echoed in the silence that followed, leaving Adam alone with Elena. He felt trapped, the walls of the room closing in on him. Elena stood as well, her expression unreadable. I didn't mean to upset him, she said, her voice quiet. You. Adam swallowed hard, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Elena, this isn't okay. You know that, right? She stepped closer, her gaze steady. What isn't okay, Adam? Talking about what we're feeling? Being honest with each other? Adam shook his head, backing away slightly. This isn't just talking. Elena tilted her head, her smile faint but still present. Maybe not. But it doesn't have to be something bad. Adam, it doesn't have to be something we're ashamed of. Adam felt his back hit the wall, the physical boundary mirroring the emotional one he desperately wanted to set. You're my stepmom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't supposed to happen. Elena's expression softened, and for the first time, Adam thought he saw something vulnerable in her eyes. I know, she said, but I also know you've been thinking about it. And so has Luke. Adam didn't respond. He couldn't. The truth was, she wasn't entirely wrong. He had thought about it. In fleeting, unguarded moments he had tried to suppress. But those thoughts didn't make this right. They didn't justify what she was doing. I need some space, Adam said finally, his voice trembling. I need time to think. Elena nodded slowly, stepping back. Of course, she said. I'll give you that. She left the room without another word, leaving Adam alone with his racing thoughts and the crushing weight of what had just happened. The next few days were some of the most uncomfortable of Adam's life. He avoided Elena as much as possible, barely speaking to her during meals and retreating to his room the moment dinner was over. But the awkwardness at home was nothing compared to the tension with Luke. Luke didn't respond to Adam's texts or calls. He skipped their usual hangout spots. And when Adam finally saw him on campus, Luke made it clear he didn't want to talk. It was as though the friendship that had been so solid for so many years was now crumbling under the weight of a single, impossible secret. Finally, after nearly a week of silence, Adam cornered Luke outside the library. Hey, he said, stepping in front of his friend. Can we talk? Luke hesitated, glancing around as though looking for an escape route. I don't know if there's anything to talk about. Come on, man, Adam said, his voice pleading. We can't just ignore this. Luke sighed, running a hand through his hair. What do you want me to say? Adam? That I'm fine with what happened. Because I'm not. Neither am I, Adam said quickly. But we need to figure this out. We can't just pretend it didn't happen. Luke's expression softened slightly, though the tension in his posture remained. What's there to figure out? She crossed a line. We both know that. Adam nodded, his stomach twisting with guilt. I know, but I don't know what to do about it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Luke let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. You know what the worst part is? A small part of me wanted to say yes. Adam's breath caught, his chest tightening at the admission. He didn't know how to respond, because he had felt the same way. But hearing Luke say it out loud made it all the more real. And all the more terrifying. I think we need some space, Luke said finally, his voice quiet, at least for a little while. Adam felt his heart sink. But he nodded. Yeah, okay. Luke gave him a small, strained smile before walking away, leaving Adam standing alone on the library steps. That evening, Adam finally decided he couldn't avoid Elena any longer. He found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book in her lap. She looked up when he entered, her expression calm but curious. Adam, she said, closing the book. What's on your mind? He sat down in the armchair across from her, his hands clenched into fists to keep them from trembling. We need to talk. Elena nodded, setting the book aside. I'm listening. Adam took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet her gaze. What you did, what you said, it wasn't okay. Her expression didn't change, but he thought he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or perhaps defiance. I understand why you feel that way, she said carefully, but I don't regret being honest with you. You should, Adam said, his voice sharper than he intended. You've put me in an impossible position. And Luke, you've completely messed things up between us. Elena's gaze softened, and she leaned forward slightly. I never meant to hurt you, Adam, or Luke. I couldn't ignore what I was feeling. Adam shook his head, his chest tightening. What you're feeling doesn't matter. You're supposed to be my stepmom. Elena, you're supposed to be what? She interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. A placeholder? A caretaker? Someone who stays in the background and doesn't have feelings of her own. Her words struck a nerve, and Adam found himself at a loss for how to respond. He hadn't thought of her that way, not consciously. At least, but he couldn't deny that part of him had always seen her as an outsider. Someone who didn't quite belong in their family. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena sighed, leaning back against the couch. I know this is complicated, Adam, and I know it's not fair to you or Luke. But I can't take back what's already happened. All I can do is be honest about how I feel. Adam stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and anger and something else. Something he didn't want to name. Finally, he stood, his hands trembling at his sides. I need time, he said, his voice tight. I need to figure out what to do. Elena nodded, her expression unreadable. Take all the time you need. Adam left the room without another word, his thoughts racing as he tried to make sense of everything. He didn't know what the future held. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. Over the next week, Adam's life was a haze of awkward silences and strained conversations. The tension in the house was unbearable, and the absence of his best friend, Luke, only made things worse. Every time he passed Elena in the hall or sat across from her at dinner, he could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on him. But the tipping point came one evening when his father, James, came home early from work. James had been distant lately, consumed by his demanding job, and his presence had been a quiet void in the household. Now, as he settled into the living room with a cup of coffee, Adam felt a wave of guilt crash over him. He couldn't keep this secret any longer. Not from his father. Dad, Adam began hesitantly, his voice trembling. Can we talk? James looked up from his tablet, his brow furrowing in concern. Of course, son. What's on your mind? Adam hesitated, his chest tightening as he tried to find the right words. It's about Elena. James's expression softened slightly, though he still looked concerned. What about her? Adam took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. She's been acting differently. Toward me. And toward Luke. James set his tablet aside, his gaze sharpening. What do you mean? Adam swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. But he forced himself to push through, recounting the events of the past few weeks, Elena's words, her actions, the unspoken tension that had consumed their household. He left out the more intimate details, unsure if he could bring himself to say them out loud. But he made it clear that her behavior had crossed a line. When he finished, James sat back in his chair, his face pale. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, and Adam could feel the weight of his father's disappointment hanging in the air. I don't even know what to say, James admitted finally, his voice strained. Are you sure about this? Adam nodded, his stomach twisting with guilt. I wouldn't lie about something like this. Dad. James closed his eyes, letting out a long, shaky breath. I need to talk to her. Later that night, Adam heard the muffled sounds of an argument coming from the living room. He didn't need to guess who it was. James and Elena's voices were unmistakable, their words sharp and filled with tension. I trusted you, Elena. James's voice was loud and angry, something Adam had rarely heard from his father. I brought you into this family. And this is how you repay me? James. It's not what you think, Elena replied, her voice calmer but no less intense. I made a mistake. Yes. But it's not as black and white as you're making it out to be. It is that simple, James shot back. You're my wife. And Adam is my son. What you did is unacceptable. Adam stayed in his room, his heart pounding as he listened to the argument unfold. He felt a strange mix of relief and guilt, relief that the truth was finally out, but guilt for the pain it was causing his father. The argument lasted late into the night, but by the time the house fell silent again, Adam knew things would never be the same. The next morning, Elena was gone. Adam woke to find a note on the kitchen counter, written in her neat, elegant handwriting. It was addressed to both him and James, and its tone was equal parts apologetic and resolute. I've decided it's best for me to leave. The note read, I know I've caused pain, and I can't undo that. But staying here would only make things harder for everyone. I hope you can both find peace and move forward. Adam felt a strange sense of relief as he read the note. He didn't know where Elena had gone, but he knew her departure was for the best. It was a chance for him and his father to rebuild their relationship, to find some semblance of normalcy again. James, however, was quiet that morning. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his coffee with a distant look in his eyes. When Adam joined him, his father finally spoke. I'm sorry, Adam, James said, his voice heavy with regret. I should have seen what was happening. I should have been there for you. It's not your fault, Dad, Adam replied, his voice quiet. You couldn't have known. James nodded, but his expression remained pained. I just want us to move forward, to be a family again. Adam smiled faintly, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. We will, Dad, I promise. Over the next few months, life slowly returned to normal. Adam and James spent more time together, going on fishing trips and working on small projects around the house. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of awkwardness and lingering tension, but they were making progress. Luke eventually came around as well. It took time and several heartfelt conversations, but their friendship began to heal. They never talked about Elena again, both silently agreeing to leave the past behind. As for Elena, Adam never saw her again. Occasionally, he wondered where she had gone and what had become of her. But he knew it was better to let those questions remain unanswered. By the time Adam started his second year of college, he felt like a different person. The events of the past year had forced him to grow in ways he hadn't expected. But they had also taught him the importance of honesty, boundaries, and forgiveness. On a crisp autumn evening, Adam sat on the back deck with his father, watching the sun set over the horizon. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. We've been through a lot, haven't we? James said, his voice thoughtful. Yeah, Adam replied, smiling faintly. But we made it through. James nodded, his expression softening. I'm proud of you, Adam. You've grown into a good man. Adam felt a warmth in his chest at his father's words. Thanks, Dad. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and amber, Adam knew they were ready to leave the past behind and embrace whatever the future held.